All right, just so you see what is in this folder, I sent you this before, but it's kind of important before next semester that you read this document. All right, it's called Creating, Running, and Packaging Your First Java Application, and it is designed to work with IntelliJ. All right, okay. Goes through creating a project all the way, everything that's in there. So you've got that. This I went and grabbed literally right from the JetBrains documentation. And it's on, when you configure a project, it's on all the things that you can do when you go through to configure. All right? You may or may not decide you want to take a look at that. This I found on javacodegeeks.com. It's IntelliJ IDEA. It's a tutorial for beginners. I thought it was well written. I went through it this morning. All right. Another thing that Java Code Geeks has is they have these handbooks. This is the thing that's real big. It's 73 pages. Look at, if you notice, it's an IntelliJ IDE handbook. 73 pages. I'm not going to go through any of it. But when you do go through it, it's, again, tutorial for beginners. So you may want to take a look at that. If, as we're going through this, stuff doesn't make sense to you, that's why I provide these outside resources. If you're like, no, I'm doing fine. Okay, that's fine. And the last thing is I put a bunch of URLs in here. All right. This one, I'm just going to quickly go through these in order. This one, this guy is a teacher someplace. I didn't track down where. It's about 15 minutes long. It's 2 years old, so it's a little bit dated. But what he does is he says, okay, what I want to do is I want to put Java on my computer and I want to put IntelliJ IDEA on my computer, and I don't have either one. And he runs through every step and he goes through everything. It's very similar to what we've done in class. But if either I did it too fast or you didn't understand something, you may want to take a look at it. All right. These two things that are in here, these are both by the same gentleman. English is definitely not his first language. That said, unbelievably knowledgeable. He's easy to understand. All right. And I don't know if you've ever done this, but you can typically play with the sound on your machine if you're watching something through YouTube, and you might want to turn him down so he only goes at like 75%. All right, if that makes it easier. But he's got a thing here. This is like 2 minutes long on if you want to configure different things on IntelliJ. And then he runs through pretty much what we did the first day, creating your first program. Again, I want you to do that if we went through this and you're thinking, I still don't have a frigging clue as to what we're doing in here. Then that's a good place to start. All right. This running IntelliJ, these two are literally both by the IntelliJ company. All right. So the first one is by a woman. She's got an English accent, which I always love. But I always wanted to move to England just so I could get that accent. Running IntelliJ IDEA for the first time and finding your way around the IntelliJ IDEA. That actually, those are the first two of 51 different videos they have on using IntelliJ IDEA. Now, I looked at the first two. I didn't look at any of the rest of them. But I noticed as you go through there and you look at those, some near the end they have 2 or 3 of them that are just on tips and tricks. So shortcuts and the like, probably a lot of things we have not even talked about. Probably I don't know about them. All right. IntelliJ, if you don't know this, IntelliJ is a product made by a company called NetBrains. And NetBrains has their own YouTube TV channel. All right. And they've got a couple they got a lot of different videos on there, but a couple that look like they'd be irrelevant. This one that's right here, we're not going to look at this now, but this is where we're going to go to. Develop Android apps from scratch with IntelliJ IDEA. That's where we're going to move toward. All right. I had a talk with Evan Gudmested, my counterpart in St. Louis. He is not real comfortable with me just giving you a month of Java and then jumping into Kotlin. He has no problem with us jumping into Android after a month, but he wants me to at least go over developing some apps with Java and then going to Kotlin. So what we'll do is we'll develop 2 or 3 apps in Java, Android apps, all right? And then when we get done, we'll redevelop the same apps in Kotlin, and you'll be able to see the difference between the two, okay? Also, if I haven't told you, next semester, when you come in here, and now what I'm about to tell you, I'm responsible for these. Each one of you, starting next semester, is going to get, bless you, you're each going to get to use in here your own Android tablet, all right, when you come in to work. Now, you can run these apps that we'll be working on next semester. You can run them through an internal program called an emulator. All right. The problem is if you'd imagine that this is your screen right here, the emulator is probably about maybe that big. See what I'm saying? So it's going to be hard. Maybe it's probably about it's probably about like this. And that kind of can be hard to see when you've got that on your screen. Now, it's a great tool for testing, all right? But it's one thing to test, and it's another thing to actually go and put it on an actual device, all right? It's going to be interesting because I'm not a hardware guy, and I've told you that before. And in the past, I've always had somebody that I could work with that if I had problems connecting or having students connect, they could always fix it. Well, I don't have that anymore. So, but I got Brady, and he sounds like he knows a lot about hardware, so I'm sure he'll help. All right? And anybody else, I'm more than willing to take help. All right? So, like I said, if you decide you don't want to, then don't take a look at any of this stuff. But especially if you feel like you're behind, I would start by going through this URL list and taking a look at some of those first couple URLs. I tried to give you shorter ones at the beginning. There literally are thousands of different URLs out there that you can look at. Thousands of different video presentations, etc. that you can look at. So you three got it. So you've got it. You three have it, correct? All right. Okay. All right. I'm still waiting to hear back from anybody from App Harbor. I haven't. If I don't hear back, I'm going to work on it again this weekend. All right. My wife promised that she was coming up this weekend until yesterday, and now she's not sure, which usually means no, I'm not. Right away, she's like, well, you're coming in the next week anyway. Yeah. Okay. Well, especially if she doesn't come, that'll give me more time that I can actually look and try to come up with some kind of a resolution to this. If for some reason we cannot, I'm considering this still open. And what I mean is, if we have to, I'll have you put 2 or 3 or 4 of your ASP.NET projects out there that we did from the book before we got into MVC. That's not what I want, but it's still better than nothing. All right, and put those up through App Harbor. All right, and I've already had a couple people that I told this to that I know from the outside have given me suggestions, but it's going to take some time to investigate that stuff. All right, so am I right in assuming that we're all right here looking at screens? I don't see anybody who's right there, but just go ahead and get into IntelliJ IDE or IDEA, please. Yesterday, I believe, we went over 3 examples. All right, between yesterday, we went over that simple payroll example where we hard-coded stuff in. Then we went through a second payroll example where we read stuff in, for lack of better words, from the console. Then we went over a third example, and in that third example, we went in and we used the J option pane stuff to read things. Okay? And I'm looking in here very quickly, sorry. Okay, so we've done all that. So we're going to continue on. Now, what I've done, do you have to do this? No, but I'm telling you, what I've done is I went back to my Java folder where I had all this stuff, and I literally removed everything from it. So there is nothing there at all right now. Do you have to do that? No. All right. Now, there probably, you may be getting this message that comes up when you run yours that says you already have an idea.something file. Do you want to overwrite it? And what I've been doing is just saying yes. All right. Now, the good news is, even if for some reason you don't have the electronic copies, you've got the hard copies of the first three things that we've done. All right. And this, you'll have to take my word for it, I'm sure, is going to run slicker once we get back and we're here starting next semester. I have to go during the break and rewrite all of the stuff that I've done in Eclipse. I want to rewrite that, and I want to put it in using IntelliJ IDEA. All right. And I think once I've done that, that'll make me a lot more conversant or better, more able with the editor than I am right now. All right. So I'm right here, and I told you about this before, that when we're here, all right, we want to come here, I want to right mouse click, I want to choose new, etc. We want to go through and do all this stuff, but we want to be in the source folder, right? So if I do an alt insert, okay, do you understand that if I'm right here on the source folder, first of all, always be in the source folder when you go and you create these Java programs. Why? Because the system is expecting that's where your Java programs reside. All right. You should be able to either hold down on the Alt key and tap the Insert key, as I've shown you. All right. Or if you don't want to do that, you should be able to just right mouse click and choose New Java Class and do it that way. Did you hear what I said? You can do it either way. There really is no difference. So this is by doing a right mouse click on the source folder and choosing New Java Class. All right. This is by being right there and doing an Alt Insert Java Class. And I get the same thing either way. All right. Now, when I went through this with you yesterday, when we went through and started doing all of this stuff, all right, I went back and thought about it later, and I thought, well, two of you were not here when we were working on this before, and I don't want to assume anything. All right, this is gonna be program payroll 4. Okay, so I'm gonna type in here again edu.rankin.jpscott.payroll04 and then payroll 04. Now, I want to say this one more time. Maybe you've heard me say it before. Maybe you're sick of hearing me say it already. First of all, it is not mandatory. Everything that we're putting before this payroll 4 right here, all of this stuff is setting up that package for us. Most Java programs that you find are in their own package. So we're giving that package a name. The name that you use is typically what's referred to as reverse domain notation. So rather than me saying jpscott@rankin.edu, it's edu.rankin.jpscott. That's where that comes from. You don't have to do it that way. You don't have to technically create a package, all right? This is going to make sure that the file is going to be saved as payroll04.java, and it will create a class at the top. It'll say public class payroll04. Does that make sense? Now, if I click the down arrow that you see right here, I'm not going to change this, but if I click the down arrow, all right, there's a bunch of other stuff that's in here. And I won't lie to you, I haven't worked with all of that stuff that's in here, but I've worked with some of it, all right? Class, well, we already know what that is. An interface, all right? An interface is like a class, but, and I'm going to say this now, and it's not going to make any sense to you probably whatsoever. When you think about it, if I look at me, okay, I have a mom. My mom's name is Audrey. My dad's name is Richard. All right? And in an ideal world, at least, I'm inheriting from both parents. Does that make sense? Unfortunately, I got my father's temperament. All right? That's a really unfortunate. I wish I would have inherited literally 100% from my mother and nothing from my dad, but that's just how it worked. All right, the point is, you can't do this kind of thing in Java programming. You couldn't do it in C# either. You can only inherit from one parent. This is called multiple inheritance. You cannot do that here. All right, you can't inherit from more than one class. But you can create sort of a subset of a class that's called an interface. And you can implement or have as many interfaces as you want. So only one parent class, but as many interfaces as you want. So if I wanted to create an interface, I would choose that. Okay? You may or may not remember enums. We've talked about those before. Enum is short for enumeration. That's if I wanted to create my own data type. So if I wanted to create a data type that was called directions, and I might put in there north, south, east, and west, that kind of thing. All right? That would be a enumerated data type. All right? I've never done any work with annotations. I've never done any work with singletons, so I'm not going to talk about either one of those. The Java FX, hopefully we'll have time to do that, not this week, but fairly early next semester. Up until that point, every single Java application that we create will be textual based. But I want to give you at least one that's GUI based. And the easiest way to create them GUI based is to create a Java FX application. All right? Just so you knew what all that stuff in there, maybe you won't remember it, but at least you've heard as far as what it means. All right? So I'm going to keep it at class. Yes. It's not letting you type. Well, let me click OK first. And you can see what I got. Okay? Plus, you can see that it has been saved as payroll04, all right, .java. And that caseness right there is always going to be the same caseness as what's right there, unless you manually change it, which will screw things up. So don't do that. I don't know. Do you have any kind of a lock on there?
I tried looking.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So again, I've told you this kind of thing before. I like to have these curlies be on separate lines. You should do it the way that it's most comfortable for you. Whether that's like this, whether, you know, regardless of what it is. All right? Now, what did you say? You remember yesterday, Ethan, what the shortcut was here? All right. So I'm going to type in the letter P, the letter S, the letter V, and hit a tab. See that? Everybody see what just happened? All right. This is one of those shortcuts, and if you missed it, let's do it again. All right, so I'm going to tap the letter P, I'm going to tap the letter S, I'm going to tap the letter V, and as soon as I tap those three letters, then I'm going to hit the tab key. And you can see what it created for me. Now, if that was too hard for you, you didn't like it, or whatever, you can just do it the old-fashioned way and type it in. The other thing, too, and you probably have seen this already, I can type in PU here. Notice it sees that it's public. I can hit tab. I can type in static, hit tab. I can type in void, hit tab. I can put this in here, string, hit tab. Bracket, bracket. It probably won't recognize args, but okay. And then do it like that. So there's so many different ways that it can be done. I'm going to do it the other way and bring that back then. Okay, like that. Again, I said this the other day. I'm just trying to repeat myself for completeness sake. There are two different types of Java programs that you can create. You can create what's called a Java application, and a Java application is designed to run on its own. All right, so basically when you get done, you get the equivalent of an executable, and it just runs. or you can create a Java applet which is designed to work under a browser. 90% of the stuff we're going to do in here is going to be applications. All right, just so you know that. If we have time, we'll go through an applet at the end. But Java applications like this one must somewhere in there have a public static void main. Must. If you think to yourself, I mentioned this the other day, this right here, those are arguments that you can pass in. And one of those first URLs that I showed you, they show you how to do that. So if you really want to learn how to do that, you can. I don't see the advantage of doing that, but it's okay. All right? Okay. So what we're going to do before we do this is I'm going to go back up to the top here. I'm not going to put anything in main right now. In fact, I'm going to have main be at the very bottom. All right? But what I want to do is I want to create some variables up here. If you create variables in Java that are not in any, all right, listen to that. You create variables in Java that are not in any method. They're known as class variables. That means you don't have to pass them around. They're available to the entire class. All right, if I want to make sure they're not used by any other class, and that's what I want, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put a comment here that says create class variables. All right? And then I'm going to start to create them. Okay? And I'm going to have here I'm sorry, private. We'll do it like this for now. String, you already saw this. First name, private, string, last name, private, double, hours, private, double, rate, private, double, gross. All right? Now, there's nothing new, nothing that we haven't done previously. In fact, everything we've done previously has been just like this. All right? All right. Now, what we're going to add in this particular program, this particular iteration that we're doing, is let's add some logic. Let's say that if the person works over 40 hours, they get overtime. We're going to assume their overtime rate is time and a half. We're going to assume that the minimum number of hours a person can work is 0. They're on vacation, they're sick, they're out, whatever. The maximum number of hours they can work at a place, we're going to assume, is 84. No one works more than 12 hours a day. All right? We're also going to assume that it's possible to work at this place and be a volunteer, so you don't make any money. Okay? Or you can work, and the maximum amount of money that you can make, let's just say, let's make it $250. All right? So $250 an hour. All right? And if you think, well, that's not that great. That's $2,000 a day. That'd be pretty darn good, I think. If you work 5 days a week, what would that be? That'd be, what, 10 grand a week? I think I could live comfortably on that. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to create some constants. Now, we could put them right down here. It doesn't matter where you put them, but what we've learned before is we really should put our constants before we put our variables. That's the way most people program. So I created my class variables. I'm going to here create my global constants. All right, so I'm going to put those up there. All right, and you might say, well, why didn't we do that first? I just wanted to show you it really and truly wouldn't matter if you put the variables first and then the constants. Whatever way you end up doing things like this, start to develop a way of doing things, a protocol for you to use, and stick to it. All right? You know, I was watching this video once, and a guy said, you know, if a person is consistent, even if the way they do things stinks, it's better than if they're inconsistent. And that actually makes sense. Because if you do something a certain way that's probably not the best way, all right, then at least if I want to show it to you, you know every place you have to go to fix it. But it shouldn't be where, well, sometimes I did it like this and sometimes I did it like this. And I say, why? I don't know. All right, that's not going to win you a lot of style points with anyone. All right. So when we create these, they're going to look similar to what we've just done, except we want to be able to use these constants all over the place. So even though we didn't need to use the word static here, we will need to use the word static with our constants, just so you all know that. Also, if you remember, what we used for constants, what we've used before in the past has been a word like const. It's not that in Java. In Java, it's the word final. That's what you use with constants. And if you say, well, why do they use that? I don't know. All right, I didn't make up the language. Someone did, and that's the word that gets used. So I'm going to create about 6 constants here. In fact, I'm going to just copy this. All right, I'm going to get errors there, but don't worry about it. We'll fix those in just a minute. All right. I have a question for you. Is there anything that's in here, right there, that doesn't make sense to anyone? I tried to come up with names that were reflective of what we're doing with them. You notice that off to the side, I get a lot of stuff that's there in gold. That just means I've created a bunch of stuff and I'm not using it yet. All right, they're warnings, okay? And the system will actually, if I come over here and click the button here, they're going to tell me that eventually, and they're going to say, do you want to just get rid of those? No. If I want to get rid of them, I wouldn't have typed them in to begin with. All right? All right. So, again, one more time. No one had a question on any of these. Just so you know, there is nothing that says I have to put a .0 after any of these. It'll work just fine without that. I have a tendency that when I create variables that can conceivably have a decimal component to them, I add that. Okay? Now, second thing is, and I didn't mean to, but for lack of better words, I lied to you. Change this word right here that says class, change that to instance. All right? While you do that, or I'll give you a second to do that, and then I'll explain why I'm having you do that. Let's assume that at this company we have 9 employees, the 9 of us that are in here. All right? I think you'd agree that each one of us would have a unique first name, a unique last name. Conceivably, we could each work a different number of hours. Conceivably, we could have a different rate. So conceivably, if they were different, we'd each have a different gross. Does that make sense? All right. Every time that you create an object, which is what we're going to be doing because we're using an object-oriented programming language, and an object is an instance of a class. So every time you create an object, it's known as creating an instance of that object. In fact, the act of actually creating objects is known as instantiation. All right, fancy word, but it just means sometimes they call it instancing. All right, but what I'm telling you is if I have 9 employees, these are going to be, every single time they're going to be unique. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. Whether I have 1 employee, 9 employees, or 9 million, those aren't going to change. Would you agree with that? Since those aren't going to change, that's why we're using the word static, okay, with them. Now, we are going to actually come down here and we're going to create 2 more variables. Now we can say create class variables. All right, and we'll have 2 of them. And I'm doing this a little differently so I can show you some of this other stuff. All right, so I'm putting in there protected. What we want to be able to do when we're done with this program is we want the program to tell us how many employees we had. And we also want the program to tell us what the total gross was. Now, if we wanted to, and if you can add this if you want to, you know this as well as I do, we could divide the total gross by the count, and we could find out what a person's average gross pay was. I don't care about that for right now. All right? This is what I care about. These variables are class variables because there's only 1. I want there to be only 1 employee count. Does that make sense to everybody? Because if I didn't use the word static there, every time I created a new employee, it would make a new counter for them. I don't want that. All right? I want there to just be 1. And same kind of thing here. I want there to be only 1 total gross. Okay? That's why those variables have the word static, and that's why these constants have the word static. Just so you know, like we've learned in other languages, it is not mandatory that constants be in uppercase. It is convention that constants are in uppercase. All right? You really should get used to using the right conventions. Some of you still aren't, and I know you're getting better all the time. The first year people, even though I tell them, and when we're programming JavaScript, have your variable start with a lowercase letter, they do it whenever the hell they feel like it. And if they don't feel like it, they don't do it. All right? And I've gotten to the point where the only way I can make sure people do it the way they're supposed to is to take off if they don't do it that way. I hate being like that. All right. All right. Are there any questions on anything that we've gone over thus far in here? All right? No. Okay. So the name of our class is Payroll04. All right? We could have just named it regular payroll. It doesn't matter. But since it's the 4th iteration, that's why I called it Payroll04. All right? Now, what I'm about to do in here, again, I'm just going to hit enter a bunch of times because I don't want to worry about main right now. But I am going to come in here and put a comment in. You don't have to do that. But that shows that, where my variables end. See that? That's the only reason I'm doing that. Everybody has all of these constants, these instance variables, these class variables. Correct. All right. So now I want to come here. What we're eventually going to do is we will do this in a little bit. We will create 9 payroll objects or Payroll 04 objects. We'll have one called Ethan, we'll have one called Evan, we'll have one called Valerie, we'll have one called Ivy, etc. We'll do that later. All right? Every time we create one of those objects, what happens is a special method is called that's called a constructor. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to write actually two different constructors. All right? And this will work. So in this first case, we're going to assume that when you create an object, that we're going to pass in a first name, a last name, a number of hours they worked, and an hourly rate. Does that make sense? And in the second case, we'll assume you just want to create a new Ethan object and not pass in anything. Well, if we create a new Ethan object and we don't pass in anything, we have to set default values. We want to do that. All right? So we're going to write two different constructors. So I'm going to put a comment here that says constructor number 1. And here's a surprise. A little later on down here, I'm going to write constructor number 2. All right? The order in which you put these constructors does not matter. Did everybody hear what I said? It doesn't matter. All right? But this one that we're going to put in here, we're going to call this a no-arg constructor. No arg, that's actually what it's referred to as. That means there are no arguments. That means we're going to have the name and parentheses and nothing in them. Does that make sense? You know what you put in parentheses is what you're passing into something. We're not going to pass anything into here. All right? So if you look up here, when we first did this, this got created for us. It said public class payroll. When we create a constructor, it's going to look just like this, except we don't use the word class. So in other words, for this first constructor, I'm going to write public payroll. Notice how it's smart enough to know 04. All right, which is what I want. And nothing inside of it. Why nothing inside of it? Again, because it's what's called a no-arg constructor. So I'm creating something with nothing in it. All right? If it doesn't make any sense, it will when we get down further on in the program. All right? So the first thing I want to do, would you agree that if I call this, I created a new employee? Would you agree? Well, I've got a variable up here that's called count. So I want to add one to it. You all know how to do that. I'm going to say plus plus count. I want to add, I'll just put a comment here that says increment total employees counter. All right. That's a good thing to do. All right. But the next thing that I want to do is I want to come in and I want to set my first name, my last name, my hours, and my rate. All right? And even though I showed you this up here, did you notice something about this? Did you notice how we didn't give them any kind of initial values? You don't do that in Java. You don't initialize any instance variables in Java when you declare them. You initialize them in their constructors. That's what a constructor is for. All right? So I'm going to come in here now and I'm going to set up default values. Now, I'm going to put it all in. It'll work, but then I'm going to make a slight change to it. You'll see it. You can type in just what I have, though. That's fine. Notice what I type in first. It's smart enough to realize it's first name. And it also is telling me, hey, what you need there is a string. So I'm going to just set that equal to, and I'm going to call this FNU. And you might say, what the heck is FNU? It stands for first name unknown. Okay? Since I set that to FNU, I'll set this to LNU, last name unknown. All right? And I'm going to set their hours. And I'm going to set those to 0. And I'm going to take their rate, and I'm going to set that equal to 0. All right? And that will work just fine. There's no problem with that. But the recommendation is when you're working with stuff in here, and you're going to see why in just a minute, okay, is that you don't say first name, last name, you say this dot. All right, so we're going to change each one of those so it has a this dot in front of it. All right, that is complete the way it is. I'm going to write the next constructor in just a minute, and then we'll take a break. All right? You have seen the word this before. You've seen that word before in programming. This means the current object, for lack of better words. Whatever you're currently working with, that's what it means. All right? So what we're saying here is that if I create a brand new payroll object and I don't pass anything in, their first name will be this, their last name will be this, their hours will be this, and their rate will be this. Now you could raise your hand and go, I understand, but that's really stupid. Well, we're doing it as a safeguard. All right, hopefully when we set these up, we'll never create an employee object like that. But what if we hire somebody and, hey, we just hired a new employee. Really, what's his name? What's her name? I don't know. All right. Or, we could just come in here and create emp10 or whatever and just set it equal to new payroll for paren. And then we could set the stuff up later. We could do that. So that's the first one. So we've created our first constructor. So I'm going to come in here now and create the second constructor. This one will not be empty. In fact, in this one, we will assume that you know everything about the person. All right? So again, I'm going to type this in two different ways because I'm trying to show you something. All right? Even if we only get through one or two of these today, that's not a problem. I'm more concerned with you hearing these concepts, so when you hear them again next semester, they're like, oh, didn't he talk about that at the end of last semester? That's the idea. All right? So I'm going to do another public. Oops, sorry, not there. Down here. Public payroll. Now notice that if I do this, okay, what is it, payroll 04? If I put in public payroll 04, all right, it's giving me some squigglies there, and it says it expects something. If I do this, I get an error. Can somebody tell me why I get an error when I did this? Because I've already have one that looks like that. See it? So what you end up putting inside of the parentheses here, that's what's referred to as the method's signature. All right? So the signature for this, I'm going to write this twice. Okay, did everybody hear me? We're going to write this twice. All right, the first time we do it, I'm going to type it like this. I'm going to be a lot more than we need to type it. All right, I'm going to put in here first name, what do we have? Hours. All right, so I'm assuming that when we write this second constructor here, when we write this one, we're going to create a new payroll object. We're going to pass in their first name, their last name, their hours, and their rate. Does that make sense to everyone? That's what we're assuming. All right? Now, in this case, whatever I pass in, this first name, I want to set that equal to this. All right? So if I'm creating a new payroll object and I give it a first name of Dominic, I want to make sure that the Dominic that I pass in here gets copied to right there as Dominic. Does that make sense? All right. Well, if I do this, what I really don't like about this language, this doesn't give me an error. So you might say, well, it doesn't, because you're going to take that first name right there is this one, and as soon as you say first name equal first name, it's going to copy that, not to here, it's going to copy that to this. No, it doesn't, because it's not that smart. So if you do it like this, and what I'm trying to show you here is if the name of your parameters are exactly the same name as your instance variables, you must use the word this. You must do that. Then it will take whatever I copy in here, it'll put it here, and it'll copy that to this one. All right? So, rather than rewriting all these, okay, Amin raises his hand and he said, hey, isn't there an easier way to do it than that? That just seems kind of stupid. And the easy way is to do this. Use different names. Then you don't need to use the word this. Now you can just say FN. Notice I can still say this if I want to. There are some Java programmers who always use the this dot, always. But you don't have to now. Now if I do this, it works just fine. All right? So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to copy this. And this will become now last. And it'll be ln. This will become hours. And it'll be h. And this will be rate. And it'll be r. No. What I'm doing is this is the value that's being passed in. This is setting it to that actual instance variable. No, this is the right order. All right. But nobody said anything. But what did I forget to do? Didn't I forget to? I still created another employee, didn't I? So just like we did above, I should have done this first. Now, with what I just showed you, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this. Everything in there is fine. Okay, did you hear me? Everything that's in there is fine. But what if I create an employee and I create my employee Ethan and I say he worked 0 hours and his rate is $1 million an hour? Right now, there's nothing to stop me from doing this. There is no validation currently that's being done on this. Did you hear what I said? There is no validation that's being done. All right? When you want to do validation on things, typically what you do is you call routines that are called sets and gets. All right? So usually, rather than even doing any of these, now don't type this in because I'm going to put it in, but I'm going to comment it all out. Normally, rather than doing this, we would have said something like this. We would have called a routine called set first name. Then we would have had another one that was called set last name. Then we would have had another one that would have been called set hours. And another one called set rate. All right? Because in each one of those routines, what I could have done is I could have done validation to make sure it was doing what I wanted it to do. All right. Or I could have literally done it right in here, and that's what we're going to do, all right, when we get back from the break. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take these 4 lines that we put in, and for now, just comment them out. All right. And when we come back, we're going to actually put in a little bit different code so you see another way of doing this. All right. So like I said, let's take a break. It's 1:35 just about. Let's come back at 1:50, please.